While the world spent the last decade debating whether Africa can industrialize, something remarkable was already happening. Manufacturing output is climbing. The African Continental Free Trade Area became operational. The Dangote refinery came online. Countries once written off as permanently dependent on raw commodity exports are building, refining, processing. But here's what nobody's telling you. There is a silent chokehold on every single one of these gains. A logistics system so broken, so expensive, and so deliberately shaped by history that it costs more to move a shipping container from Lagos to Mombasa than it does to ship that same container from Lagos to Shanghai. Let that sink in for a moment. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to give you an honest breakdown of why Africa's industrial revolution is being strangled by its own supply chain, who built it that way, who benefits from keeping it broken, and whether the new corridors being built are actually breaking the pattern or just painting over it. Let me give you a number that should keep you up at night. Intra-African trade hit $220 billion in 2024, a 12.4% increase, the fastest growing trade region on the planet. And yet, intra-African trade is still only about 15% of Africa's total trade volume. For comparison, intra-European trade is around 60%, intra-Asian trade over 50%. Now here's where it gets really interesting. This is not because African countries don't produce things their neighbors need. Kenya exports tea, but Ethiopia imports tea from Sri Lanka. Nigeria produces cement, but Ghana sources clinker from Asia. The demand is there, the production capacity is growing. The problem is the 500 kilometers between the factory and the border and what it costs to cross them. According to the World Bank, moving goods domestically in Africa can cost up to 5 times what it costs in the United States. Not a little more, 5 times. And the kicker, ladies and gentlemen, 40% of those transport costs come directly from poor infrastructure, not labor costs, not fuel prices, infrastructure. Roads that wash out every rainy season. Rail lines that haven't been upgraded since colonial administrators drew them on a map. Ports where cargo sits for 3 weeks waiting for a berth. Now I know what you're thinking. Surely, the major ports are modernized by now, surely. Let me read you the current numbers. Durban, South Africa's largest port, the gateway to the continent's most industrialized economy. Vessels face wait times of up to 10 to 21 days. That is not a typo. 3 weeks, sitting at anchor, burning fuel, before a container even touches African soil. Dar es Salaam averages 5.3 days. Mombasa over 3 days median wait. These are not outlier events anymore. This is a normal operating procedure. And guess what happens when the goods finally get off the ship? They hit the road network. A road network where the average transport cost is between $0.07 and $0.12 per ton kilometer, compared to $0.01 to $0.03 in developed economies. Do you understand what that means? The profit margin on African manufactured goods is eaten by the road even before the product reaches the market. Now, here's where we have to be honest, ladies and gentlemen, because the crisis was not an accident, it was designed. The railway system that exists across much of Africa today was not built to connect African economies to each other. It was built to connect mines to ports, copper from the copper belt to the Indian Ocean, cocoa from the interior to the Atlantic, diamonds, gold, uranium, extract, load, ship. That was the logic. Not one single colonizing power asked the question, how do we connect Africans to each other so they can trade? And here's the brutal truth. After independence, most of those rail lines were not replaced, not reoriented, not reimagined. they were inherited, and in many cases, they deteriorated. The African Development Bank estimates the continent's infrastructure financing gap at $68 to $108 billion annually. That is the gap between what is needed and what is being spent. Every year, that gap persists. The colonial skeleton remains in place. But guess what? The pattern runs deeper than just rails. The road network follows the same logic. Major highways run from the interior to the coast, extraction corridors, cross-border roads between African nations remain some of the worst maintained on the planet. And when you don't have roads connecting neighbors, what do you get? You get Ethiopian Airlines flying fresh produce from Addis Ababa to Brussels, while the Kenyan market 300 kilometers away imports vegetables from the Netherlands. This is not supply chain efficiency, ladies and gentlemen. This is the ghost of the colonial economy still running the show. Now, the African Continental Free Trade Area was supposed to be the solution. A single market of 1.4 billion people, tariffs dropping, borders opening, the largest free trade zone by population on earth, and on paper, it is one of the most ambitious economic projects in modern history. But ladies and gentlemen, let me ask you a question. What's good is a free trade agreement when the physical cost of moving goods across the border is higher than the tariff you just eliminated? Intra-African trade costs are still 20% higher than the global average. That is the number from the African Trade and Economic Outlook 2025 report. You can eliminate every tariff on the books, and you should, but if the trucking costs from Accra to Abidjan is still triple what it should be, the tariff was never the real barrier. The real barrier was the pothole, the missing railway link, the ports that cannot handle the volume, the border posts where customs clearance takes 2 days because the systems are not digitized. This right here is the gap between political ambition and technical execution. The leaders signed the agreement. The logistics were not built to deliver it. Now let me bring this down to something you can feel, because so far I've been throwing numbers at you. Here's what logistics failure actually means. 40%, 4 out of every 10 of the food produced in sub-Saharan Africa is lost before it reaches a consumer. Not pests, not drought, transportation. The World Bank published a report in May 2025 explicitly stating that transportation inefficiencies are causing significant food losses. A farmer in Uganda grows more than enough to feed our community. The surplus rots in a truck stuck in the mud on the way to the market. Meanwhile, a city in South Sudan imports grain from Ukraine. That is not food production crisis. That is a logistics crisis wearing a food crisis mask. Ladies and gentlemen, I have said this before and I'll say it again. You cannot have industrial sovereignty without logistical sovereignty. You cannot process your own resources if you cannot move them. You cannot build a manufacturing base if the cost of getting components from the next country over is higher than importing them from another continent. What do you think about this? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Is the infrastructure gap the biggest barrier to African industrialization, or is there something deeper we haven't discussed? Do let me know in the comments. I want to hear from you. Representing A2 is Flo. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next video.